You're listening to Changing Reality. Changing Reality, where we bend reality all across the world. Only on WQHS Radio. So hi everyone and welcome to another episode of Changing Reality. Welcome one, welcome all. If this is your first time in the show, where have you been all this time? Don't you know this is the place to be? And if you're a returning member of our audience, thank you so much for joining us once again. As always, we love having you with us here on WQHS Radio. And if you are new, Changing Reality is essentially a show that features phenomenal people from all walks of life who are, in essence, changing their own reality. And through this show, we'll have the opportunity to hang out and speak to brilliant individuals from social change makers, entrepreneurs, industry experts, leaders in thought, business owners, to even artists, musicians, and inspiring individuals from all across the world, and many of whom have spent some time here on the Penn campus as well. And by hearing their inspiring stories on how they managed to change the reality around them, hopefully we'll pick up little nuggets of wisdom that we can use in our own journeys as well to shorten the learning curve as we strive towards what success means for all of us personally. And this is a show that I personally am very passionate about and wanted to do because I feel like there are a lot of people out there who do absolutely amazing things and make waves in the lives of those around them. And I think by uncovering those stories, we all get a little bit of a leg up in understanding our own selves and our own journeys at times. To show you how important the power of stories has been to me and to my own journey personally. Hi, my name is Harsha, and I'm your host for Changing Reality. I actually personally founded and run a youth movement called Ascendance, which started off in Malaysia, which is where I'm from, but today collaborates with not just our Malaysian Ministry of Education, but works with over 26 different countries to provide an alternative education platform for any student who wants to change their reality. So we're a social enterprise that works with students from elementary all the way up to college through various sessions, programs, experiential learning opportunities, and projects that help them discover their passion, learn about themselves and the world around them, and helps them create meaningful impact and careers for themselves while they're still in school. We've been fortunate to date to work with over 50,000 students, over 1,000 communities, and have incubated countless number of student-run projects and social enterprises run by students aged 8 to 25 years old. And I bring that up because one of the reasons we're able to do all of that has been stories. It's been kind individuals who've been willing to take their time out of their busy schedules and come and share what worked for them, what didn't, what were the things they learned along the way, so that others may have the opportunity to get a little bit of inspiration and know that they're not alone in the things that they want to achieve. So if there's any specific stories that you want to hear about, if there's any specific industries, experiences that you want to explore, let us know so that this platform, that Changing Reality, can be that same medium for you to learn about yourselves and start changing the world around you as well. So on to our speaker today. Our speaker today is absolutely phenomenal. He has a wide range of experiences as an entrepreneur, a venture financer, an executive, and has worked both locally and in international markets. His background includes managing international development for retail startups, building private equity transactions, working, as we said, in all parts of the world, and even in industries, even learning and interacting with industries from energy, recycling, the life sciences, and many others. He received an MBA from the Wharton School in 2003, but also did his bachelor's degree here in 1994. And while he was at Wharton, won the 2003 Wharton Way Leadership Award. So he's definitely someone who I think is well versed in the university, but also the world around this. So without further ado, let's welcome the current managing partner at Toro Advisory Partners, Thomas, our guest speaker for today.
Hello, Harsha. How are you? That is quite an introduction. I'm not quite sure how to follow that up.
Really? I had to cut it down. There was too many things in the introduction. Like, do less in a sense. It'll make people like me, our jobs much easier. But how's your day going? I know you had a bit of travel come up, a lot of excitement the last week.
A lot of excitement, yes. Forgot the joys of summer travel and was actually very recently just back on the Penn campus for my 20th MBA reunion. Next year, I have my 30th Penn undergrad reunion. So yes, been on campus fairly frequently, and it's a lovely time of year to be on Locust Walk.
Okay, in that case, since you brought that up, I have to ask you, the most controversial question of the show right off the straight. So What do you think has been the biggest thing that's changed on the Penn campus since when you were studying there and today? Since you were there recently.
Oh my goodness. Well, I think I have very specific experiences on the Penn campus, right? So I have from 90 to 94, my experience there as an undergrad, started off in King's Court and made my way through 4 great years. And the campus obviously was very different. We had some big social movements there with the Rodney King verdict, and I remember sitting outside the president's house on the street with hundreds and hundreds of students and residents from the neighborhood. As the president came out and Sheldon Hackney spoke about the need for peace and the need for calm and the need for discourse, and then coming back in 2001 to 2003, living on Rittenhouse Square, getting my MBA. That transition too, we started off in Vance Hall, which has been around since, it was there when I was an undergrad. It was probably there when Ben Franklin started the university. And then moving into Huntsman Hall, which was this, big gleaming starship that kind of set down on the Penn campus. And at that point, the university had done a lot of work to really kind of buy up a lot of the real estate around the university. And so really kind of increasing Penn's footprint. And then I had the privilege of coming back and running MBA admissions and financial aid for the Wharton School from 05 to 08. And that was a very different experience as well, now being essentially an employee of the university and seeing it from that perspective. So every time I go back, I see something new. I think that the fact that Penn has really just been aggressive in expanding its footprint and creating this whole ecosystem and all the new research buildings and opportunities and things, it's a lot of fun to go back. But the one thing that never changes, and I just kind of sat on Locust Walk the last time I was back with a coffee, talking to a friend and just listening to students like yourself, just this energy, this passion, this excitement is very inspiring. I loved it when I was working at Wharton, just listening to all these ideas and all these things that these bright young people were on their way to do. And that continuation is something that gives me great hope. So.
Well, you took my very, trying to put you on the spot question and turned it into something very inspirational. So we can end the interview here. That was on.
Okay. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
But no, winding the clock back a little, when you were taking your first step on Locust Walk all those years ago in your undergrad journey, what was it that got you to Penn? Was it always, an institution that you knew about? Were you a lost and confused kid like me who didn't know much about Penn and then stepped out and realized, oh my gosh, I'm so out of my depth in a sense? What was that initial experience of, learning about university, taking that first step as an undergrad student and being kind of thrown into this whole environment of, as you said, vibrant and energetic, exciting people?
Of course. I love that question. And you said something that I want to touch on really briefly is, I didn't know what I was doing. I wasn't sure how I snuck in and, got admitted to the school and wasn't sure what I was doing there. And, I find that among most students, it's a very common sentiment, right? Everybody here is so amazing. How did admissions mess up and let me in? And I think that humility is really what Penn looks for, right? Excellence, but also humility and curiosity and drive. And I can tell you, having been the person, for better or for worse, who signed, tens of thousands of admissions letters, there are really no mistakes. We really, there's a lot of time and energy invested into each student. So for your listeners, for the students out there who are thinking, how am I here? Everybody seems to have it all figured out. Everybody seems to know exactly what they're doing and exactly where they're going. The answer is they really don't, right? Everybody's really good at kind of pretending. And some students certainly do have some aspects figured out, but nobody has everything figured out. Okay. And it doesn't matter if you're, 19, 20 in undergrad or graduate students. Right. So when I was a graduate student, I was 30 years old. And I can tell you my classmates and I had no idea We had very clear ideas going in. Closer we got to graduation, most of us were scrambling saying, I don't know, what should I do? There's all these opportunities. I don't want to make the wrong choice. And so first thing is, take a deep breath, because everybody's really in the same boat. For me, I had very dear friends who were very active at the university. I had been admitted to the University of Virginia. I was committed to going there. I was going to be a varsity athlete. I had this great path laid out in front of me. And they said, no, you're completely insane. You need to come visit Penn. So, okay, fine. Sounds good. So I went to Penn, met with then Dean of Admissions, Lee Stetson, who spent the first, I think, 10 minutes of our talk telling me that I was an idiot for not applying, to Penn early, and what was I thinking. And I remember just sitting there staring at him, and this is long before the internet. Okay. I remember when the internet was first developed, and it was such a big deal because we could, instead of dialing into Penn's course registration system, Paris, we could actually look at our classes online. And that is this like, just lines of text. So this was when you had to buy the book and leaf through. So that's my excuse. But honestly, I remember sitting outside of his office and reading the course selection. And I had always been an entrepreneur. I kind of been an entrepreneur, spent the summers working at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange and the open outcry commodity pits. I'd run my own business, small businesses. And I remember reading the Wharton course catalog and saying, oh my gosh, I had no idea that there was actually business undergrad. Okay, I'm making myself sound like I didn't have a clue, because I truly didn't. And I said, that's what I want to do. But the class was full. So I matriculated as a member of the College of Arts and Sciences. And somewhere in that first year on my path to, I'm going to transfer to Wharton, took a political science class that changed the trajectory of my academic career, loved it, and shifted my major over to international relations, and just really dug in, was convinced I was going to go to Washington, wanted to be a senator, be involved in politics, but that plan obviously changed.
Well, if you did become a senator, get into politics, I think we would have added too many things to your resume, because you have a very interesting story. So after that, you did do the whole entrepreneur, you did the whole finance, you even go back to Penn as someone working there. So a whole lot of things. But I think one of the things that I didn't mention in the beginning is you were for a while exploring professional water polo as a thing that you were doing, which is insane. I mean, I was always the mediocre one in school who and water polo. So tell me a little bit about this chapter of your life, in a sense.
Sure. And so one minor correction is that it was actually polo with the horses. Polo. I haven't taught them how to swim yet, so we haven't quite gotten to the water part.
Sorry, though, that's even worse in a sense, because that's so much more coordination and so much. Oh gosh, I'm not even going to get into it. Okay, polo, horses.
Not at all.
Setting the right track, doing the whole thing. All right, going, yeah.
No, I was very fortunate. I grew up around horses. I loved horses. I spent many summers working in at our barn, running it, and it sounds far more glamorous than it is, pitching hay bales in Midwestern summer heat, unloading 300-400 hay bales in the middle of July. Never fun. Mucking stalls, scrubbing tack. So it sounds glamorous. And the reality is that for the 2 hours of glamour, there's, months and years of hard work and blood, sweat, and tears. But yeah, so I had an opportunity. I was recruited to the University of Virginia to play varsity polo. It's a varsity sport there, and obviously detoured to Penn. Just made the decision that I love the sport. I love horses, but my education was the most important part of my journey, and really just was fascinated by the academic opportunities at Penn. When I left Penn, I had an opportunity to spend the summer playing in Greenwich, Connecticut, playing professional polo. And so the agreement I had was that I got to do that for the summer with my parents. I got to do that for the summer, but then come September, I was going off to work, right? This was not a career option for me. This was something I had a unique opportunity to do. And I loved it. And I got to meet some really, really exceptional people. I have good friends all over the world that I play polo with and stay in touch, and family friends, and just wonderful, wonderful experiences there. So yes.
So you'd recommend taking a sport while you're at Penn, not too much of a detour from all the finance classes?
I think in all things in life, balance is important. So I intentionally did not pursue polo at Penn because I wanted to try other things. Okay, horses were my sport. I am not a good swimmer, so you have me beat there. But I was friends with people who were varsity athletes, JV athletes, club level athletes. I think the wonderful thing about a university like Penn is that there's so many different interesting things to try. Right. And so whatever your passion is, if it's entrepreneurship, if it's literature, if it's art, if it's sports, do that. Right. Just go in and do it, because when you're engaged, what in my experience, when you're engaged with something you're really passionate about, you make true and deep friendships, and you feed that side of yourself. And so if you're at a school or you're at a company and you're laser focused on what you're doing and that's all you can see, you lose a key part of yourself, right? And then, and why does that matter? That matters on a macro level in terms of who you are as a human being. But of course, your listeners are pragmatic and they're smart and they're like, okay, that's all great and that's fuzzy. Give it to me in something that actually matters. But the reality is that most things that you will do, most opportunities are created because of who you are and your connection and relationships to people. Right. For those who are looking at going to work in a more corporate environment, there's what used to be referred to as the airport test. Right. If I'm stuck in an airport with a delayed flight for 6 hours, do I want to be stuck with this person? Right. And so having things to talk about, and you'll find, your listeners will find, as they start submitting resumes and interviewing, yes, they will test your technical skills, but they'll look down at the bottom of the resume to your other interests and they'll say, oh, you play water polo, you're a competitive archer, you have exhibited paintings in these shows. Tell me about that. Because they really want to see what's your level of intellectual curiosity, who are you as a person. And that's a key part, because there's always a lot of people who can do the work, by and large. I'm making generalizations, right?
Generally, there are people who can do the work.
Right.
But no, I agree with that. And I think deep down, all of us want to have an really rounded life. You want the arts, the sciences, the sports, the people, the connection. I was actually having this discussion with someone at the panel I spoke with. They were saying, Gen Z are very money-minded. And I said, yeah, that's true in a sense. But a lot of us look at, material success as a way that, eventually we can achieve all these exciting things. We can travel, we can do all of that if we get,
Right.
the first few years, get the grind through in a sense, and then all of that will happen. You have a different story a little bit. Your first, I would say, few years were actually spent, working, I think, in Switzerland, in Russia, a few different countries in a sense. So tell me a little bit about your journey finding that first career in a sense, and how was it different from, the conventional way that people look at approaching their careers?
Of course. And I think, everybody has their own path, and there are certain careers that you need to start out in, right, and kind of grind your way up the ladder a little bit.
Doctors are an example. I would not want to, yeah.
Yeah, right. Doctors, engineers. I mean, you can't just pivot at 40 and I guess you could and say, hey, I'd like to become a neurosurgeon. It's a little bit difficult, right? I've always had a very entrepreneurial approach to life and to who I am. And so, I had an opportunity initially to go work in Geneva for a very dear friend and learn the private banking business. I made it maybe 5-6 months in Geneva and realized I was a little bit bored, right? Perfect for this stage of my life where I have children and a family. But as a 22-year-old wanting to make my mark in the world and trying to think of creative, dynamic new things. At that time, Geneva was a very kind of quiet, sedate, Geneva is Geneva. It's a phenomenal city. But I had the opportunity to go to what was then the big frontier, which was Moscow, Russia. And Russia, the wall had recently fallen. Boris Yeltsin had been made president, the first kind of post-Soviet president. And I had studied Soviet history at Penn. My focus in international relations was basically Soviet-American strategic nuclear deterrent theory. Completely irrelevant these days, but anyway, very interesting. And so I had an opportunity to go look at a investment transaction in Moscow. I went, I took one look around and called back to Geneva and said, listen, I love you guys. I appreciate the opportunity, but there is energy here. There is opportunity here, and I'm going to stay. And they said, okay, hold on. We've been looking for some idiot to open a branch office for us there. And quite frankly, you're an idiot. So the job is yours if you want it, because nobody else does. And so I dug in. We started a fixed income and an equity fund, but I also started a few entrepreneurial ventures on the side and just loved it. It was very exciting for a young person at that point. These big emerging markets and all the chaos that was going on was exciting, and there was tremendous opportunity.
My small, tiny enterprise in a relatively very stable, very known part of the world drives me absolutely mad all the time. I cannot imagine you going, halfway across the world, different part of where you're used to it all, and then running not just, this whole finance career, but being an entrepreneur on the ground itself. I like what you mentioned earlier, you have this entrepreneurial personality in a sense. How does that translate on the ground into being able to start looking at opportunities and developing those ideas into reality? Because you had, I think, an agricultural startup a little while later. I think back in the States, you had a cosmetics or
Yes.
a skincare startup as well. I don't see the connection between the two of them. So the connection must be you and your entrepreneurial acumen. So how do you go about starting something new? Maybe share, that first example in Moscow on the ground in a sense.
Sure. And I think, the nice thing is that when you're that age, I won't speak for anybody else, but for me at that age, I was too dumb to know any better. Right. I didn't have the experience to know what I didn't know. I didn't have the experience to know what I shouldn't do. And so I just did. And I want to make very clear to you and to your listeners, I made an infinite amount of mistakes. Right. I mean, I made more mistakes than I can possibly count or choose to remember. And I think the important thing is I've always been very willing and quick to learn from my mistakes. And I think that was something that was drilled into me when I was young, when I was in high school, when I was in college, spending summers on the floor of the Mercantile Exchange. And if you look at the old videos of that, it's the men and women jumping around in the colored jackets, waving their hands around. It looks like chaos, and it is chaos, but it's organized chaos. And the one thing that was drummed into my head from minute one is everybody makes mistakes, right? Smart people admit that very quickly and react and cut their losses and just shake it off and get back in the fight. And stupid people hide from their mistakes and it crushes you. Right. And so early on, I was kind of told over and over again, everybody makes mistakes. It's okay. Adapt, react, survive, thrive. And so going to a place like Russia at that point, there was so much opportunity. Right. And so you try things, it wouldn't work. You try other things, it wouldn't work. And so, identified an opportunity in the agricultural space, built this agricultural business, kind of growing local food, because when I first got there, the only place to get Western products were these tightly controlled Western supermarkets, right? You kind of had to be a Westerner to go. They opened that up a little bit as as time went on. But the reality is that anybody, right? I wasn't particularly smart. I just looked around and said, look, there's a lot of Russians here, a lot of Russians that are starting to make money. They're going to want high quality products. They don't necessarily want or need, with this emergent middle class, to pay for French cheese or Swedish vegetables or whatever it was, because they were very, very, very expensive. So there has to be a domestic market. And so, pulled some things together, saw some opportunities, and built this little startup, which was a lot of fun. So
tell me also a bit about, some of those mistakes, because mistakes is something that I personally struggle with. I think, when in high school, and this does not apply to Penn where everyone's very smart, but in high school, you get all the A's. There's no A in life in a sense. If you fail in life, you don't get a 97 or a 53. You fail terribly. That is something that, recently as well, I just made another of many mistakes in one of my startups. And part of me knows, okay, this is part of the process. This is part of, how it goes in a sense. But I feel like, I get a little too caught up in the emotion. Have you ever felt in your entrepreneurial journey in those early stages, a mistake that that kept bugging you in a sense? And how do you make sure that you're rectifying or you're learning in a sense and not just brushing it to the side?
No, I think, you know, a lot of entrepreneurs, it's hard because you have that balance, right, between relentless optimism, because you have to be, right? Because it's lonely and everybody's telling you no, and things are going wrong, and you have to believe in your vision, right? And certainly there are times when I've believed too much in the vision, when I saw the signs. I should have cut my losses. You know, I should have not thrown good money after bad, and I didn't, because I'm a human being, and because you get invested and you believe in your own success, and you think that, you know, it'll be different this time. I can change it. And I think that, you know, I think that, to answer your question, when we did the skincare startup in Denver, um, you know, there was a point where I realized that I don't know enough, right? So I was sitting in meetings with investment bankers, and we were trying to raise money. We were trying to expand. I was talking to the accountants, and our business partner was very, very knowledgeable. He really understood how to use accounting to your advantage as you're growing and building a company, right? Providing tax shields and all the things that you need to do. And I kind of stepped out of that, and I said, you know, I don't understand. Not only do I not understand what's going on, but what I really don't like is that when I ask a question that's a legitimate question, they can talk over the top of me, right? So they can throw a bunch of words at me that I don't know the meaning of and kind of bury me in lingo. And I didn't like that. And that, for me, was one of the largest drivers for me to go to business school, because I said, look, I'm smart enough to understand this, and there has to be a better way to understand it. And there was a natural off ramp at that point, for the business, because I'm an early stage person. I like taking the idea and running with it and pulling the people together, and, you know, reaching out to my network and pulling things together and building things from raw clay. That's where I'm really good. I'm not an operator, and I'm not a growth person. I'm not good at taking an existing company and making it bigger. I'm good at that early stage, because that's where my passion is.
No, very well said, and I think that's a nice segue into, you know, your next part of the Wharton chapter, that at the very least, in a sense, and doing your MBA. One of the things that, you know, I think there's so much value, especially at that stage, in a sense, to learn not just from, you know, the information, but from people who have been in those conversations, who've been in, you know, different seats in around different tables across the world. And I think part of the beauty of Wharton is that you get to meet people from all across the world who are experts and professionals in their own areas, in a sense. Tell me about why, you know, that going into business school, what were you hoping to kind of get out of it, and how did you manage to, you know, make the most of the experience there? One of the things that I always have is, I know what I don't know, or even I know that I don't know, but I don't know what it is I actually need to learn. So how do you actually start figuring out those pieces? Like, I know I'm an idiot, but in which area do I focus on now, in a sense?
Yes, not knowing what you don't know can be both a blessing and a curse sometimes. You know, I think when I was looking at business schools, you know, I was coming out of this and saying, okay, I'm a somewhat experienced entrepreneur. I've been very fortunate, and I think we both understand how much of a role luck plays in successful entrepreneurship. And I knew that the thing that scared me most was the hard analytical side, right? Finance, accounting. For me, that was something that was terrifying. And so I looked at the top business schools, and I said, where am I going to get that? Because it'd be very easy for me to go to a school, for example, like Stanford. Not easy to get in, but comfortable for me to go to a school like Stanford as an entrepreneur and do that, right? Or go to a school like Harvard that's much more kind of plays to my skills in terms of rhetoric and speaking and those things. And I said, what are the schools that really terrify me? And Wharton was at the top of that list. But what I liked most about Wharton was that it had learning teams. And so I knew I wouldn't be just swimming out there against the current on my own, that I would have a group of people that I could rely on. And that's really what happened. And so I was on a learning team where I contributed my particular set of skills. We had engineers that were they were so smart in math that my brain hurt. I give them credit. that they would take the time to explain basic finance concepts to me 10 times until I got it, because it's not the way my brain works, right? I don't see numbers the same way they did. But at the same time, putting them in front of a room of 80 or 100 people to do a presentation terrified them, right? And I love that. I'm like fighting to get to the front of that because it's where I thrive. And so, those experiences really worked. And so I think putting yourself in uncomfortable situations, but doing it in a way that you're going to learn and be challenged is really, really important, especially as an entrepreneur, as somebody looking to get out in your career. Take advantage of mentorship, right? Take advantage. There are so many people that do want to help you, right? Especially, students coming out of undergrad or in undergrad. You have access to this very powerful Penn network, or whatever your academic, or if you're in a fraternity or a sports team or whatever your affiliate groups are, you have these great opportunities to reach out and ask people for advice. And people love to give you advice and share their experience. And I think as long as you view it through the lens of, okay, that worked really well for them. I'm not sure if it's going to work well for me, but I'm going to take some learnings here, because not everyone is as proactive and clever as you are to be able to call up the people you want to talk to and say, hey, give me advice. I have this radio show, and people are like, ooh, that sounds really legitimate. But I think you'll find that really sending out emails and picking up the phone, and now I'm dating myself, picking up the phone, but sending out emails or whatever, and reaching out to alumni with whom you have something in common, people will respond. Not everybody will respond. And be smart, right? Don't send email to the CEO of Goldman Sachs and say, hey, or the current CEO of Microsoft, and say, hey, Sundar, we're both Penn grads. Can you give me half an hour of your time? Because the answer is going to be a hard no. But find that person that maybe is at a level that they can relate to you and empathize and give you some meaningful advice. So,
I mean, if the CEO of Goldman Sachs is watching, my inbox is open, but I already have like amazing, like the show's a little full. No, that's very good advice, and I think just the conversations are so helpful, and I really appreciate you sharing that. And I really am glad to know that you also have those moments where you're talking to people who have to explain things to you a little bit like below their expert level, and I think it's really inspiring to see that after your time at Penn and doing the MBA, you actually went the full Silicon Valley track. I think after that you were actually in, I think, growth stage capital, venture capital as well, for the next phase of your career, which is very different from the entrepreneurial. It's like literally the other side of the table. So you were like, what is the furthest thing I can do from what else? And you're like, oh, okay, there it is. So why choose that path in a sense? Like, was it a specific experience that you wanted to have, and a passion that was growing for that area, or were you just like, you know what, I always wanted to be the person writing the checks. Like, let me see what I do now. Like,
instead of the person grinding it out. Well, I had a very interesting experience when I was at Wharton, that as a student. And, we had started this cosmeceutical company, and we had this big network, very valuable network of sales representatives. We had over 40 full-time sales representatives that were calling on cosmetic surgeons and dermatologists. And I said, there's got to be a way to leverage that. It's a very valuable piece of our company. And so I found a company up in San Francisco I wanted to buy that sold medical devices. And this was a really interesting thing. So through my friend network, people heard that I was trying to do this. And I had a deal team put together of friends. I had McKinsey and Bain consultants. I had, Arthur Andersen accountants. I had Goldman and JP Morgan bankers. I had to tell people to be quiet on the conference calls because they were terrifying. It was this like husband and wife team that built this really nice business, right? And they're getting on with their attorney, and I'm getting on with 10 people around the table that I could never afford and were way out of my league. But they wanted, for them, it was exciting and interesting and fun to help a friend, and then also work on something like live that they could really kind of dig their hands in. And that transaction kind of fell apart, but for unrelated reasons. But, as I was doing that, I said, okay, what is an experience I have not had? And it was on the other side. And I realized I didn't have what it took to be an investment banker. It's just not in my DNA. It was not who I wanted to be, but I really was fascinated by the world of venture investing, right? Because I felt like it kept me close to entrepreneurs, and my experience would be valuable without having to go get an idea and grind out the misery of building a company again, right? The very sweet misery, but it is a misery. And so that kind of drew me to the Valley. And I thought it'd be exciting. I thought it'd be different. And it was. And I learned a lot there about how to think of companies as investments, how to think about how to deploy capital in a strategic, effective way.
So building on from that, right, first of all, that's absolutely hilarious, having all of the top tier, literally Ivy team, at the back in a sense. I'm gonna go and yell at my dumb undergrad friends to better
to step it up. Let's go.
Yeah, like, what do you mean you're interning here? Like, do better. But yeah, but no, very absolutely hilarious. If I was the founder, I'd be terrified to be on that Zoom call with you. But having said that, tell us now, like one of the things that I'm very curious about is whenever I meet a lot of people, and not that I've met so many, but when I have the few that I've met in the VC world, not all of them actually understand the perspective of an entrepreneur, or at least understand how things are a little different from necessarily, the presentations and the metrics. And it was actually something that I had to adjust the way I thought as an entrepreneur to start speaking kind of the VC language in a sense. Do you think being an entrepreneur in your previous, experiences helped you in your role now on the other side? I know I make it seem very dramatic, but like, do you think it like oh you crossed over? But no, do you think it helped you as you were viewing companies to understand them in a different lens compared to others who maybe would not have had those experiences? And what are things that us entrepreneurs don't think about when we're talking and interacting with VCs that you guys see differently?
Well, I think it was tremendously helpful. It was tremendously helpful also in terms of relating with entrepreneurs, right? Being able to understand their concerns, being able to speak their language. And I think that, as an entrepreneur, I think, as you said, a lot of entrepreneurs don't understand how to build a company for an exit or for, acquisition. You have an idea, you have this passion, and a lot of times you can get so tunnel visioned on building a company that you're not structuring things in a way that allows you to continue to grow and thrive, right? And I think sometimes that's where you read about founders getting pushed out because they just don't have the ability to think in a bigger picture, right? And that's not a criticism, right? I am absolutely probably somebody that if I started a company and took a lot of venture money, they would look to sideline me as quickly as possible, would be my guess, right? Because at that point, they have a different vision for the company. They are trying to build value to exit to the next stage, right? And you have a clock ticking because you're in a portfolio that has a 10-year horizon. And so understanding the motivations and limitations of the venture side, I think, is very important, right? And I know that high level tech investing definitely works differently. I've never been smart enough to work in tech. I know that. I'm not that person. And so I'm not talking to every aspect of venture, but, in terms of building companies and growing them, I think there are two separate languages, and being able to bridge that is very important. And as an entrepreneur, you really need to have an awareness of, if I'm taking venture money, by and large, I am partnering with these people. And so do I want this person on my board? Do I want to answer to this person? Do I want this person calling me 3 times a week saying, are you hitting your numbers? What does revenue look like? What's happening? Because they have a vested interest, because they have a fiduciary duty to their investors, right? And you're accepting that. That's your deal with the devil, right? For better or for worse. And it can make you phenomenally successful. It can help you take your idea and bring it out to the rest of the world, right, on a much larger scale. But there's, like everything, I think there's trade-offs.
Very, very nicely said. I'm reevaluating the way that I think of my companies, and it makes me go, am I setting it up for that? Different conversation, but okay, yes. That was a hit. You got me there. All right. You also had another interesting pivot after that, and that was when you actually started at Wharton admissions. You were like, you know what else have I not done? I've been the student. Now I want to like do that's like the equivalent of like entrepreneur becoming VC. Like you're like student
Right.
becoming admissions in a sense. You that like very cool parallel. But one of the things when we last spoke, you said that was very, very interesting. And not to quote you at all, and not trying to say it as well as you did, but you said it was important to do at that point, something that was deeply meaningful, not necessarily on 100% financial level, but to
Mhm.
you in a sense. And that was an important part of your career. And that is something that I think, a lot of us don't even have the maturity or awareness to think about in a sense at times, in a sense that am I taking a pivot in my career that is meaningful to my personal growth or the things that I'm passionate about? Tell me a
Mhm.
little bit about that decision and the cool, exciting world of Wharton admissions that we do not have privy to.
I love that you're saying other people are finding things deeply meaningful. This coming from the young person who has started a social startup that's reached 50,000 students. So I think it's amazing what you have done, right? And I think that it's you touched on this, and I will answer your question, but you touched on this a little bit earlier. You said, people accuse my generation of being focused on the money or focused on success. And I think that what I love the most about students that I interact with from your generation is that you have a very clear-eyed understanding of the trade-off, right? And so you're not, my generation fell for that whole line about, loyalty to the company and we're all a family and we're doing this together. And what we realized is that I think what your generation really realizes is that no, companies are companies, and they're very self-interested, and that's not a criticism, it's a reality. And that if you don't create the path that you want, if you don't feed that side of yourself, nobody else is going to. And so I love that. I love the disruption that you're causing and your generation is causing in the workspace. And I really like the new way of thinking and challenge that you're bringing to older generations of managers and leaders. And I can't think of anything better. So stay with that. In terms of MBA admissions, I was sitting at my desk in Cupertino, and I got a phone call from the then dean of the Wharton School, the then vice dean. And, I don't even have a guilty conscience at all. When the vice dean calls you, a year after you graduated, you're like, oh no, okay, Anjani, Vice Dean Jane, what did I do? And he said, look, we're the current dean of admissions is at that point we were referred to as a director of admissions, is stepping down, and we would really like you to consider the position. We know that, we can't match the salary, we can't match the opportunity, and you have, that you have where you are now, and you're going to have to interview. But personally, we've done a lot of work together during my time as a student, and we would really like it to be you. So I thought very long and hard about that, because on the one hand, we were in the process of taking one of our portfolio companies public. There was the argument that, hey, just stick with the venture, hit your number, and then step away for 5 years and do whatever you want, right? You can do whatever you want after this. But on the other side, I thought, and I reached out to a lot of people I respected and talked about this and talked about my concerns, my fears, my goals. And what I came away from was that this was pretty much a once in a lifetime opportunity to do something I loved. I've always been involved in admissions. I loved admissions. I was a second year member of the admissions committee during my time as an MBA student. I've always been involved in admissions from my prep school to Penn. And I said, I will never forgive myself if I give this up for money. And I was lucky in that I had been successful in some of my previous ventures. And I apparently barely got the job, but I did. And it was such an incredible opportunity. It was something where, I could talk to you for days about students that I met and students that I admitted who went on to do great things, or that I took a chance on and who came and just were extraordinary, and I loved it. It was deeply fulfilling. I worked with a team of truly extraordinary people, and still, when I travel around the world, I meet people that I admitted, or I meet people that I knew from my time there, and it's such a great feeling.
No, very cool. And you were just saying that the last time you were in Malaysia, it was for the admissions events and everything.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
for the spoilers, if anyone is looking for career admission, sounds very cool in the sense you get to travel.
You get to travel, you get to meet amazing people. And, and I think it's good because it really puts you in a position where when you're talking to people, there's, you and I spoke about this. Steve Jobs gave a commencement speech at Stanford, and I highly encourage, any of your listeners to go watch it. It's on YouTube. And I'm going to paraphrase. I don't do it any justice, but the paraphrase is that you can only make sense of where you are in life by looking backwards, right? And so, Steve Jobs talked about how he was at college, he had to fill a requirement. He took a calligraphy class, and something in it really spoke to him: the beauty, the spacing of letters, the aesthetic of it. And he really took that as a core value into all the things he did as a designer, designing products and fonts and typefaces and just the feel of Apple, right? Everything that he did. And it's always one of the stories you hear about Steve Jobs was his attention to detail, his attention to interface and beauty and function and form. And so I think, as I look back on my career and I think about the things that seem very unrelated, right? And you've brought that up. You're like, okay, I don't get it. You were doing agriculture startups, and then, I don't know, skincare. And then all of a sudden you're on the venture side, and then all of a sudden you're running admissions, and none of this makes sense, but it makes sense as you look at it, kind of as an arc, and where I am now. And again, being an entrepreneur and running an education focused startup and investing in education technology companies, the sum total of my experience really has led me to where I am, and continues to inform where I will be, 5, 10, 15 years from now.
Absolutely amazing. And I think, you've come a little bit full circle. You have, two components right now in your career: on the finance side,
Yes.
Investments with an education lens at times. And you also have, a very interesting, dimension to your career where you actually help, students get a little bit of insight, a little bit of advice for students who maybe are first generation, low income, to think about their college journeys in a sense. And students in general who are, as we said in the beginning of the session, maybe not entirely sure of where their life is headed in a sense.
Yes.
If you look back now, winding back and with all of this, being Steve Jobs on commencement day and being able to connect all the dots, what do you think is a common thread that you see now linking all of those, experiences, whether that be a character or a mindset, a goal, or a thought that brought you through all of it?
I think for me, and I can only talk about myself, it was always intellectual curiosity. I'm relentlessly curious about things, and I'm unafraid to learn, and I'm unafraid to say what I don't know, right? I'm the first one to raise my hand and say, I don't understand that. That's not clear to me. Help me understand what this means. And I remember being a young man starting my career, and, all the gray hairs at the table would tell me the smartest people always ask questions and are unafraid to say that they don't know. And, being 21, 22, I wanted to prove to the world that, no, I got this. And I've learned that lesson. Also being unafraid to fail. Look, failure when you're in your 40s and you have a family looks very different than failure when you're 21 and all they can do is come take your student loans. Who cares, right? Take them. You want them? Take them, because you don't have anything to lose. And so I've always been willing to take risks and always been willing to go left where other people go right? Zig where others zag. And that has not always worked out for me, but on balance, I've been very fortunate that it has. And so I understand that it takes some courage to do that. I understand that there are a million reasons why you should not do that, right? But I always believe that you need to be honest with yourself about what you want and what your risk appetite is, right? And so if job security and working for a big company is important to you, then you should do that, right? Don't try and force yourself into a situation that you know in your heart you don't want to be in, right? Because it's your life, it's your path. And as when I talk to people in high school and college, in the professional world, as they're trying to prepare for their next education step, it's very clear the students who, are somewhat clear about what they want or have made conscious decisions, and others who have kind of drifted along and done what they're supposed to do. And the ones who try to take some ownership and ask questions, and look, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to have to backtrack sometimes. That's okay. That's not a fatal thing. It's good. And as long as you learn the lessons from that, I think I've always been able to not take failure personally, but not in a destructive way. Take it, internalize it, learn from it, and then say, okay, we're going to just do that better next time. So
I usually ask for advice for the end of the session, but I think you ended it on a very high note, and I understand. And I think I'm going to take that as the advice. I'm going to personally go home and think about how I internalize failure in a not destructive way. Okay, got it.
Excellent.
All right. So end this then, in a sense, with a few words about your podcast, because I think it's very relevant to our audience in a sense. Tell us a little bit about why you started it, and
Sure.
And where can we find it? Tell us about what it's about. Where can we go?
Appreciate that. So the podcast is called Admittedly, and it's available on all the major services. You can reach it at thomascaleel.com if you want to look for our past episodes. And it was started because I do a lot of pro bono work around admissions. So I work with large foundations, with socioeconomically disadvantaged students. I've worked with a startup art school in New Mexico. Every year I work with anywhere from 2 to 4 pro bono admissions candidates and help them on the admissions process to high school, college, or graduate school, because it's something I love, I really care about. And it's amazing because you can really have a transformative impact on a whole family's trajectory. And so what happened was, in speaking with my wife, she's like, this is great, but you invest all this time and energy into 1 or 2 people, and you're really missing an opportunity to share your knowledge with a broad audience of people who could really benefit. And so, as we've established, I'm a bit of a dinosaur, and with some poking and prodding and basically walking me up and saying, there's a microphone, now talk, started this podcast, and we've gotten really great feedback from families. I take a very blunt kind of approach to this, and having the perspective of having been on the other side of admissions and understanding that, there is no formula for success, right? There is no one path that you can take. I think allows a certain clarity. And we do some fun things where we have, we invite students on and we kind of break down their application and talk to them about pluses, minuses, ask them questions. So it's a little bit more interactive. We've had some brave students who have kind of, put themselves out there for that. Is a lot of fun. And I think because admissions is so opaque, and because admissions really changes every year, right? What the school is looking for changes every year as they build their class. It's something that it's a way of thinking about things that the student needs to internalize, rather than, okay, do this and then do this and do this. There's no algorithm here. And that's immensely frustrating for some people, but it should be liberating, because, when we first spoke, you said, well, I don't even know how I got into Penn. And within the first, 5 minutes of our talking, it was very clear why you got into Penn, right? And so to me, at least. And so I think that what we're trying to do is inspire people to think about their education as a journey, and give them confidence that, no, you don't look like everybody else, right? Your profile does not look like anybody else, but you know what? That's great, right? Embrace that, lean into that, be yourself, and we will help you find that good fit for you, right? And that place where you are going to really thrive.
Amazing. I gave you an option to plug, but you decided to inspire instead. So, thank
Sorry.
you. I was like, here, check it out here. We're the greatest podcast on earth. But now you're like, you guys are awesome. And now I'm in tears and our audience is very sad. And, so we're all going to watch the podcast. Thank you for
Great.
telling us. And more importantly, thank you for all of your amazing stories this last, this last hour or so. I really appreciate you being on the show. I learned a lot. I think our audience definitely learned a lot as well. So hopefully you just had as much fun as we did talking to you in sharing your experiences.
I am humbled by the opportunity, Arsha, and what a pleasure to meet you. I hope to hear from some of your listeners. You can contact me through the website at thomascaleel.com with your questions, or if you're brave enough to come on and have a conversation on the podcast. I'm definitely going to get on the podcast if I can find a space in your schedule. And then it's my turn to ask you the questions.
Oh no! Okay. I shouldn't have. Luckily, I went with the easy ones, right? Okay.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, and to our audience, thank you for joining us as well. This has been Changing Reality. We're on Thursdays at 10 p.m. Eastern, and we'll see you again next week. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
You're listening to Changing Reality. Changing Reality, where we bend reality all across the world. Only on WQHS Radio.